Frederick, Colorado looked like the ultimate American success story. The Watts family lived in one of these pristine, two-story homes, projecting the image of a perfectly happy upper-middle-class life. Then, on August 13, 2018, that illusion abruptly snapped. Pregnant mother Shanann Watts and her two young daughters, Bella and Celeste, vanished completely. Investigators walked through the home and found it perfectly quiet. There were no signs of a break-in, no scuffle in the hallways, and Shanann's car was still parked neatly inside the garage. Random abductors leave a chaotic trail. A perfectly clean house with an entirely missing family points investigators in a very specific direction. Someone with a key and close personal access orchestrated the event. Hours after his family disappeared, Chris Watts was standing on his front porch talking to local news crews. He was eerily calm, offering polite smiles and showing absolutely zero panic for a man whose pregnant wife and two toddlers were missing. Experienced detectives look for exactly these types of behavioral deviations. While Chris performed for the cameras, the police quietly placed him firmly at the center of their suspicion. Convinced he could maintain his cover, Chris made a massive miscalculation. He agreed to sit for a polygraph test without seeking legal representation. By willingly walking into the police station, Chris believed his reputation as a gentle family man would outsmart the system. He was entirely unaware he was stepping into a psychological trap. Inside the physical interrogation room, Chris leaned forward and confidently denied everything. But the investigators sitting across from him were already holding damaging background intelligence. While Chris played the role of a baffled husband, police had pulled his background data. They uncovered severe financial distress and a marriage that was quietly buckling under a mountain of debt. This timeline maps out the rising pressure. On one side, financial obligations are skyrocketing. On the other axis, Chris had started a secret relationship with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger, and both timelines aggressively converge right on the date of the disappearance. Criminal psychologists recognize this as a search for a clean slate. Rather than navigate the massive social and financial fallout of a divorce, the killer decides it is easier to erase their current life entirely. The police knew exactly why Chris wanted his family out of the picture. Their challenge was figuring out how to extract a confession without a single piece of physical evidence tying him to a crime. Confronting a liar with hard facts usually fails. If the detectives attacked Chris aggressively with his financial records, he would likely panic, lock down, and demand a lawyer. Instead, they analyzed his behavior and pinpointed his core weakness, his massive ego and his desperate need to be perceived by everyone around him as a reasonable, good guy. The investigators leaned across the table and offered a hypothetical scenario. They gently suggested that perhaps Shanann had hurt the girls in a fit of anger, and Chris only reacted out of retaliatory grief. This is a highly effective interviewing tactic. It avoids calling the suspect a monster directly. By providing a socially acceptable excuse, it lowers their mental defenses just enough to admit to a lesser evil. The strategy worked flawlessly. Desperate to save face and preserve a shred of his reputation, Chris took the bait. He confessed to murdering his wife, permanently destroying his impenetrable alibi. The detectives never actually believed the story about Shanann hurting the children. That excuse was a complete fabrication, used solely as a wedge to secure his initial admission of guilt. With his primary alibi shattered and his psychological walls down, investigators stopped humoring the retaliation theory and easily pushed through to extract the real timeline. The actual events of that morning were incredibly grim. Chris admitted to loading his living family members into the back of his work truck under the cover of darkness. He drove to an isolated industrial disposal site owned by his employer. There, he took the lives of his two young daughters and hid them out of sight inside those massive oil storage tanks. The public saw a gentle, devoted father on their television screens. The reality was a man who coldly disposed of his entire family in a desolate dirt lot. By November 2018, the evidence was insurmountable. To avoid a lengthy trial and the death penalty, Chris Watts chose to plead guilty to all charges. He was handed multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He is now permanently isolated in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. In just a few days, investigators managed to resolve a complex missing persons case that started with a clean house and zero physical evidence. Flawless suburban exteriors and polite smiles can effectively camouflage monstrous intentions. But as this case proves, even the most carefully constructed lies will fracture under the pressure of a perfectly executed psychological interrogation.